we've talked about how LSU's wanted to lock down the state of Louisiana, especially after last year's class, which was a little weird or whatever with the kind of the coaching change and some of the guys you knew you weren't going to get or whatever. This class, they're doing a really good job in the top 10. They're doing a good job getting some guys that have some upside out of Louisiana, which we always like to see. And now your top two guys on the On3 industry ranking are Louisiana prospects. Andre Evans is the top prospect on On3. What do you think of the approach so far? And I think I know we're both in the let's not panic phase because it is June and about to be July, and there is a long way to go. And there are certain recruitments that seem like they're going to stretch out. But I mean, do you think June was a success? Do you see this class sitting in a good spot right now, just overall?
I think to unpack June would be a whole nother podcast just because you got so many good evals in on younger guys and you had so many guys on campus that are going to help for the future that weighs in to me just as much as who you had on OVs, who you walked away with commits from, who you might be trending for or not. June, just because of camps, does so much more than just this current class. So when I look at the commit list, though, yes, they will. Would you like them to add more heavy hitters? Absolutely. And that time will come. I firmly believe we're only in June. But I like that they've put the emphasis on Louisiana. And in July, I'll have the piece that I've talked about. It's tons of research. But one thing that stands out about Louisiana is a Louisiana 3-star who signs with LSU is 1.5 times more likely to get drafted than an out-of-state 3-star who signs with LSU. Louisiana has the athletes. They have the players. If you can evaluate it correctly, you're going to walk away with guys that you can develop into Sunday players. And when I look at what they've done so far, Billy's kind of scrolling through it now on YouTube and letting you look at it. They went out of state for a quarterback in Colin Hurley, okay? So that position's done. They don't really need a running back in this class, but if there was one, it's Caden Durham, who they've been on. He's an out-of-state guy. At receiver, they have 3 commitments. We think it'll be 4 with Jelani Watkins. That would make half the group Louisiana receivers, and Jelani Watkins is a Louisiana native, so it would make 3 of the 4 Louisiana natives. At tight end, they just signed 3 high school guys. They added a JUCO guy in Connor Gilbreth. So this offseason, you're adding 4 guys to that room with Mason Taylor. Do you need another beyond Tradez Green? I don't know, but Tradez Green is one of the top 5 tight ends in the country. He's coming out of Louisiana, just now actually transferring to play a senior year at Zachary. So that'll be fun to watch. We just talked about the O-line a good bit. And they'll continue to evaluate Louisiana offensive linemen. Perhaps someone pops up that they make a move on, but they've got the number 1 offensive lineman in Louisiana committed in Kyrie Lee. Now we've seen him go out of state. And again, Ethan Callaway announces Friday. I don't know when you're listening to this, but whether he is on board with LSU or they're trending for him, that's one of the top 10 offensive tackles in the country. And you're going all the way to the East Coast to do it. Or Williams, a guy in Texas we feel good about. It's always good to go into the border states because those are guys that you have a good chance to get and then aren't always quick to transfer because they're not from far away. And a guy like Roy Williams would stick around and be developed. And when I look on the defensive side, people don't want to hear this, but when you've had 3 defensive line coaches in 3 years, Billy, because of all the coaching changes and then Jamar Cain moving to the NFL and then now having to hire a third name in Jimmy Lindsey in those 3 years, it's tough to maintain relationships with guys. And they've done a great job with Colin Simmons, and there's other out-of-state guys out there, and there will be guys that Jimmy Lindsey reels in. I liked going after that group, though, of Ahmad Bro. They made the move on Demarion Johnson to get him committed. Kalaj Cobbins is a bit of an edge linebacker type. They got him on board out of a state title team in Destrehan that always produces top talent. So if you know it was going to be an uphill battle to land a ton of out-of-state defensive linemen you felt really good about, then lock in the guys in state that you feel good about. They did it. And linebacker is probably one of our favorite positions. If you want to put Cobbins in there, great. But Devon Keys in Texas has looked really good. Xavier Atkins is a guy who got on really early, and he's from Louisiana but moved to Texas, and that would give them, in theory right now, 3 linebackers. And then that DB room, we talked about it to start out the pod. You added Andre Evans from out of state, Tennessee's number 1 prospect this month, but you got Juwan Johnson out of Louisiana, one of the best players in the state. You already got Wallace Foster on board, one of the best players in New Orleans for sure. You've locked up the 2 top safeties in Louisiana and Joel Rogers and Deshaun McBride. And you still got out there a Wardell Mack, who's one of the best DBs in the state, a guy I think a lot of coaches like at safety, even more than corner. But Kai Bates, an out-of-state target, Jalen Crawford, an out-of-state target, Kobe Black, an out-of-state target. They are still going to be recruiting all these other spots, but they've made it very clear that early on they wanted to prioritize Louisiana. And I guess here at the end, icing on the cake or whatever you want to call it, Louisiana also happens to be home to one of the top 3 kickers in the country, and Aaron Burrell. They got him committed. So you've touched on a lot of different needs, but also made sure not to let anybody in Louisiana leave. And that only leaves, Billy, right now, a handful of guys that they have offered in Louisiana that are not committed anywhere, and LSU is still in on. There is a chance they can clean sweep all these guys, which would have been a far cry from, as you led off this conversation with, a year ago. Yes, there were coaching changes. Yes, Arch Manning was never coming to LSU. I don't think Eli Holstein was ever coming to LSU. So there's different factors here, but regardless, they missed out on more than half of the top 10 in Louisiana. That's the built-in recruiting advantage of LSU is Louisiana. If you're missing out on half the top 10, you're not taking advantage of it. So to see them turn around now and have a chance to maybe get all of the top 10 to go to LSU is a light years difference, and shows me that they knew where to start with prioritizing what has to happen in recruiting. And it's best players here leave, get all the best players to stay, then go nab those out-of-state prospects that really put you into a top 5 class.
And I don't mind the strategy at all. I think, especially with this class, it's the right approach. I mean, I think there's a guy here or there you could argue, okay, all right, maybe they should have waited on, but I don't think, looking at all these guys, I don't really have a gripe with them. We pretty much saw all of them in camp this summer, or I've seen them work out in another setting. And I think the Louisiana class right now, I'm good with. Like, it is a good mixture of guys that have a lot of upside, that are highly touted, maybe developmental, or maybe kind of just you're betting on the trend, like you said, developing a Louisiana 3-star. And the 3 probably hardest gets, I don't think anyone will argue this. The 3 hardest gets in this class were always going to be Dominick McKinley, Wardell Mack, and Tylen Singleton, all for very different reasons. You have Wardell Mack, who sits in a 5-star type range for On3 right now. He's in New Orleans, but still, there are plenty of programs that are going to come after him. Frank Wilson hasn't been back at LSU that long. LSU, went through what it went through to get to this point. Then you have Dominick McKinley. Well, now the entire SEC is after him for the most part. You're going against some of the heavyweights. Tylen Singleton, the Manny factor. Can they actually break that and get somebody from that high school to come to LSU? Those are the 3 hardest ones to get. And we know there's going to be ebbs and flows with those recruitments. My question is, at this point, do they need to get all 3? Do they need to get 2 of 3? And by 2 of 3, I would say Mack and McKinley to be successful in Louisiana this recruiting class overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up very well. They have not gotten a Manny guy recently, and Singleton's given him plenty of interest. But does he want to go play somewhere else? Does he want to land at a TCU or some out of state school that's not
Texas
LSU?
A&M.
Right, Texas A&M. I mean, I don't know. He's kind of been mum on naming a leader or a team to beat or any of that. And look, Matt House has done a great job of getting in there, made a ton of visits to Manny, has got a good relationship with Tylen. But until they get a Manny guy, I'm not just going to comment on it. Like, I just want to see it happen first. The 2 guys who are South Louisiana guys, and McKinley out of Acadiana, and then obviously Wardell Mack out of New Orleans, there's not that fear of or worry of like, okay, can we get him? Like, the Acadiana area until 2 years ago maybe had never really seen any kids recently leave for another school when LSU wanted them. You're wanting to reverse that trend. And I think that's why they made the move and got Demarion Johnson out of Westgate. You don't want that trend to continue of guys to leave out of Westgate, New Iberia. So they got on a guy like him. I think that's the same with Dominick McKinley. They'll do whatever it takes to get him. And I'm in the same boat with Wardell Mack. And look, they have 2 good safeties right now, Joel Rogers and Deshaun McBride. Again, I think a lot of colleges are viewing Wardell Mack as a guy who could help even more at safety, you'd love to be able to add him. And I don't see Frank Wilson letting a John Eric kid get outside the state right now, especially if they want him and they consider him a need, which at this point they certainly do. So I'd put him number one and the one I feel best about. McKinley, I am just so not in the I guess I'm in the dark. I don't think all these coaches are in the dark. I just think that he's so new to recruiting and he blew up in the spring that he's made all these visits now to other schools. LSU saved their OVs with all three of these guys. So they'll be able to get them on campus closer to signing day, which I think matters with in-state kids more than anything. I don't know if it's too early to call. I still stick by do I think Texas, Billy, or other schools have made a big impression? Absolutely. In 6 months, what do I think? When signing day arrives, I think that by then LSU will have them around campus enough, continue to build that bond, and then they'll know exactly, hey, what do we have to do to get him? Who is the champion of the recruitment? You know, who around him do we really need to get in with and convince him, look, this is the best decision for him? And when the dust settles, I think LSU is going to get him. I can't see LSU putting this much of a concerted effort into Louisiana, but then not coming away with a guy like McKinley.
I think for me, you nailed it on the head with these guys with Louisiana overall, because one, Tylen, I think it's been quiet for all three, which is kind of like, all right, are you sure? But also Wardell Mack, I think, has done a good job of taking his visits. I agree with you that Frank Wilson has a good feel for this recruitment. And that is the most important thing when you try to dive into these recruitments. How much of a handle does, and this goes for any school, does the assistant coach or the lead recruiter or whoever's involved have on what's going on behind the scenes with family, what's going on behind the scenes with visits? And that's the biggest key to having Frank Wilson, especially with Wardell Mack. So I don't worry there. Could somebody maybe come in and get him? It's recruiting, sure. But I think out of the three, I feel best about Wardell Mack. The thing about Dominick McKinley, not only is he new to it, but, and this is from talking with sources, and I'm going to drop a piece kind of on my thoughts on the top three guys in Louisiana that are uncommitted on Friday. My thing is everybody will sit there and say, well, this is a defensive lineman who is a 5-star in SEC territory. Everybody's going after him. Oh my gosh, he's going to be astronomical NIL. Just NIL him, and that'll keep him in Louisiana or whatever. I don't think that family just rides like that. Just from talking to different people, they are very quiet. This is very new to them. I don't think they want to be involved in that sort of recruitment. I think they want to find where they feel at best. That's why they've been to LSU multiple times. That's why they took all these official visits to different programs in June. The good thing for LSU, the official visit is in the back pocket, which when you look at some of the action, sometimes you can sit there and say, you know, he took 4 other official visits elsewhere. Well, that's a cause for concern. Well, on the flip side, he's been to LSU multiple times. You fully expect him to take an official visit to LSU, right? Those are all some of the reading the tea leaves things that are tough for us at times to work through. But I think as quiet as he is, they're a family that I think understand what he can obviously get in NIL at some point. But because they're so new to this and the schools have come so quickly, everybody's kind of on the same level as far as where they started. You know, the rush for Dominick McKinley truly started in late November, early December, but especially January. And I think that's the one where you've got to, if you're LSU, Jimmy Lindsey's got to buckle in, Frank Wilson, all the support staff that knows people in that area. That's where you've got to be able to make it that family vibe to stay home and play for LSU, like a lot of Acadiana kids have done through the years. And then Tylen Singleton, I just think Matt House has to just keep doing what he's doing and try to really, you know, hone in on sharing how big of a need he is for them, because they don't have somebody like a Tylen Singleton really on the roster. So if their plan for him to play that kind of nickel linebacker position is there, he's got that ability to come in and play it. So there are 3 very different recruitments going on that have very different approaches that I think LSU can take too.
Yeah, and I'll wrap up the pod here, Billy, by saying, at least giving my final thoughts on the number one player in the state, who is McKinley, Dominick McKinley, coming out of Acadiana. You want to land that elite defensive lineman. You don't want to let him leave the state. And at that point, LSU does do anything they have to do to get him. But remember, Jimmy Lindsey is in the very beginning stages here of being able to build a relationship with McKinley. He's got 6, 7 months to do it. When we talk to people at South Carolina who worked closely with the program, who knew Jimmy Lindsey very well, who followed recruiting, they said that one of Jimmy Lindsey's best things is like that you can look up and he's in with everyone in the family and they've got a really tight bond and he can do it quickly. So I'm anxious, or not anxious, I'm eager to see if that happens with Dominick McKinley, because 6, 7 months, that's a good amount of time. If he's an in-state kid who's 30 minutes down the road and you're a new hire, to really get in there and make a relationship. And from everyone I talked to at South Carolina, Jimmy Lindsey was the D-line coach at South Carolina before LSU. They all said the biggest thing, especially with recruiting, is he knew how to get in and make relationships with a family and a kid, to where whether they were committed, they wouldn't even entertain other schools, or whether they wanted to get them to commit, he always had them right there as one of the top 2 schools or potentially landing them because of relationships. So I'm these next 6, 7 months for Jimmy Lindsey, and I can promise you from talking around to sources, prioritizing Dominick McKinley and that relationship is right there at the top. So yeah. I do think that when the dust settles, a guy like McKinley, we're going to view LSU's chances of getting McKinley a lot better in 4 or 5 months than we are right now, when, as you noted, it still feels like the very beginning of his process. He's just taking visits everywhere.
Yeah. So he has wrapped up his official visits now. We'll see if he gets to LSU in July. I don't think he made it in June, but they will have that recruiting weekend in July. So we'll see if he gets to LSU. That would be, I think, a big sign just before his senior year gets going, to see him make that visit. And it's kind of same with Tylen and Wardell and guys like that. So LSU's not going to give up. Those are 3 very big keys to their class and how people view it and all those things. And trust me, they get it.